This is the Second Studio, hosted by the Architecture and Design Office fame. My name is David Lee, and with me is Marina Borderonay. The two of us are partners at the office, hosts of the show, and today our guest is Matt Risinger.
Matt is the founder of Risinger Built in Austin and the founder of The Built Show.
Yes, and look, anyone who's a contractor or architect, you probably already know of Matt and The Build Show. Highly successful. A bunch of links will be in the episode notes. With Matt, we talk about how, I don't know, we actually went out of order this time. We talked about the LA fires and fire resiliency. We talked about The Build Show. We talked about being a contractor, finding a good contractor as a client.
Building better,
kind of all over the map. This was the challenge we knew was going to happen. We knew that we had probably 8 hours worth of questions and 90 minutes. But I think we covered a lot of good stuff, and I know you guys are going to enjoy it. And then regarding the LA fires, Matt did a great episode or a video about the LA fires, which we'll put the link in our episode notes. And if you have any questions about that or rebuilding, feel free to reach out to us on our hotline separately. Sponsors.
Would you like to get as-built faster?
Yes.
Okay. IPX has you covered. IPX lets you seamlessly transform laser scans into LOD 300 BIM and CAD files. Whether you've got your 3D scans already or need the full laser scanning service, IPX offers instant pricing and order tracking for scan-to-BIM services on any project, no matter the size or complexity. Once a building scan is complete, IPX delivers detailed BIM, CAD, 360 virtual tours, and material takeoffs in their platform, where you can view, share, export, query, and quantify areas, floors, and materials. Check out the IPX link in our show notes.
Designers and architects, if you're looking for a powerful, real-time visualization and VR tool, then check out Enscape. Enscape is super easy to use because it's a plugin and not a standalone application, which means you can directly work in your SketchUp, ArchiCAD, Rhino, Vectorworks, or Revit model. In fact, it only takes a couple of clicks from installation to creating your first rendering. Enscape does realistic renderings, 360-degree panoramas and videos, and virtual reality environments. We use Enscape in our office, we love it, and we think you will too. So click the Enscape 3D link in our show notes to learn more. Revit users, you have access to a powerful new capability you might not know about. Available with Revit version 2023.1 onward, Autodesk Insight is a next-generation carbon analysis tool that can help you make the leap toward low-carbon design. With only a few clicks, Insight lets you analyze, understand, and track the embodied and operational carbon impact of your design choices. You can then visualize opportunities for energy efficiency and carbon mitigation with its flexible dashboards, helping you make more sustainable and informed decisions. Check out the Insight link in our show notes to learn more. This is the Second Studio with myself, Marina, and our guest, Matt. Here we go. Usually listeners know that we start by asking our guests where they're from and whatnot, but we just had a short conversation about the recent LA fires, and so let's just continue that. And you were saying that where you are in Texas, I think you're in Austin, but in Texas there's a lot of fires as well, which maybe people wouldn't imagine as being much as in California.
Yeah, David, we're in Austin in particular, in Texas in general, we're actually at a pretty high wildfire risk as well. And in fact, I just saw a PBS story about this yesterday, this is from the Texas A&M Forest Service. There's 94,673 homes with an elevated wildfire damage risk just in Austin, Texas. And I don't think people think of Texas as wildfires, but here's a couple stats for you from that same video I was watching. In 2017, in the state of Texas, we had 744,000 acres burned. In 2011, we had 3.9 million acres burned from wildfires. And it kind of goes on and on the list. And 09 was 750, 08 was 1.6, 06 was 1.9. So it's not on the news like it is in Colorado or California. And I think there's probably been less homes built in some of those forest areas that have burned, but we're actually a pretty big forest producer. In fact, East Texas is known as the piney woods of Texas, and a lot of the wood I use at my house is grown in East Texas, and it is shipped all over Texas for construction. And of course, we have a huge market. We're one of the biggest states in the nation right now for permits, if not the biggest. So it's a big deal for us too. And what happened in LA, my Texas builder friends were absolutely paying attention to, and our hearts go out to you guys. I mean, it's been just gut wrenching to see what's happening there. And as a side note, I'm a YouTube nerd, right? I watch YouTube. I'm in my 50s. This is my old school method for entertainment. And I was watching this guy, Van Neistat. You know Casey Neistat's brother, the YouTuber Van Neistat? Do you watch him?
Yeah. I know of him.
He's my age, so he's particularly interesting as a YouTuber, but he lives in the Palisades area. Ooh. And he published a video the other day that was his story of like his house almost got burned, it didn't. And he had a very personal kind of vlog style, you know, getting my family out, getting my valuables out. Oh my gosh, I forgot my passport, having to go back into his house that was in a danger zone. All these streets are blocked off. He used his electric motorcycle to go on like some back roads and was able to get past the cops. He showed this footage of him like at his house that he's thinking might be his last time visiting. You know, his kids are born there. It was so emotional to see, and it's something the news doesn't capture. Like it's obviously emotional to see the terrible after effects and people that are at their house and crying, and you feel that. But there was something about this that really resonated with me. Like, oh my gosh, what would I do if I'm thinking this could be the last time I'm ever in this house? Like, I can only carry what's in my backpack because he's in a motorcycle. What do I take?
Yeah.
And even like down to he had scratched in his Satillo tile floor his kid's birth date and his name because his kid was born in the house.
Oh gosh.
And it was one of those, and he's like, well, this will survive the fire. Like, I'll be able to dig this out and get to this tile again.
Right.
Everything else is probably going to be gone. And in the end, his house didn't burn down. It got within like couple hundred yards. But there was something about that story that, you know, this guy, my age, my life situation, a dad, a YouTuber, right? There was something about it that just really made it much more personable to me. And I think that's probably what it is about these LA fires that have caught the nation's attention so much. You know, there's horrors going around the world with war in Ukraine and the war in the Middle East, but there's something about that feels so remote. And yet these LA fires is like, you know, everybody knows someone there. And of course, a bunch of celebrities too, right? Yeah. So I don't know if you know, but I published a video about it while the fires were still happening. And there was 2 houses that survived. One that was an architect design house that kind of used some passive house principles and had some really smart architecture. And I'm blanking on the architect's name. I apologize. I should know it.
Well, we'll put the video link in the show notes and whatnot. Yeah.
Link it up. And then Tom Hanks's house survived too.
Oh, okay.
Right. And so I made a video that basically like, why do these 2 houses survive? And I think Tom Hanks's house was a little bit more probably, and I don't know the architect or I don't know Tom Hanks either. It was a little bit more of like some lucky situations, meaning like no venting in his roof, rather new construction. He had part metal roof, part flat roof with no venting. He had mostly a stucco exterior. He had this huge retaining wall in the back that acted as a bit of a fire break. So he had kind of all these good elements going. Plus, of course, anybody's house has survived. You're like, well, I don't know why God blew the winds differently for that house, but he did, right? And then for the house that survived, there was a bunch of other things too that weren't house related. It was like they put a concrete 4 or 5 foot wall around the house as a cool modern wall, which they probably assumed would help in the fire. They didn't know that there was going to be a burned out car, 4 feet from the wall that was like because of the burned aluminum and like the streaking aluminum on the driveway. I read in a Reddit forum, someone's like, well, aluminum doesn't melt until, I forget what it was, 1400 degrees. So on the other side of that concrete wall, there was a fire that was 1400 degrees, right? So that concrete wall absolutely saved that side of the house from taking the brunt of a blowtorch, style fire.
Jeez.
But long story short, I mean, it's back to my point, which is, Texans aren't thought of as being at risk, but a lot of people are, and not enough of Texas knows it. And so I was really glad to see this PBS story, and I think that my builder community here in Texas is absolutely talking around our whole office. We've been like, hey, whether we're in a wildfire zone or not, we really need to think about doing this, this, and this in our houses, and really encouraging people to do these best practices.
Yeah, absolutely. And, unfortunately, a lot of times it takes a massive event, and one that oftentimes is not a positive one, to have change take place. Because as you know, as professionals, as architects and contractors, we can propose certain things to our clients and say, for fire resiliency, or water, trying to keep out water, or for energy efficiency, like all of these things, we can do that. But everyone has a budget, and a lot of times, not always, a lot of times when they see the numbers, they're like, yeah, but I think I don't exactly.
If it's not mandatory, like, people would skip it.
I'd rather pocket the tens of thousands or hundreds or whatever it might be. Or they think more short term, which is, well, I only plan on keeping this house for X period of time, then I'm probably going to sell and move. So I don't really care about that long term,
100%.
which is for any, I think, serious architect and builder. Like, we think the opposite.
Short-term thinking.
We think long-term. Yeah, exactly.
Well, we have to think long-term because we're on the hook long after you sell the house, Mr. Homeowner. And that's, I don't necessarily tell all my clients that, but that's absolutely in my forefront. If you sell your house after 2 years, I'm still on the hook for at least another 10 years legally for your house. So I could be 3 owners deep on a house that's 10 years old. And if there's a problem, they have zero relationship with me. They don't have a good feeling about, oh, those guys took care of me during construction. I have this minor problem. If they want to go straight to, oh, this builder is an absolute horrible, I'm going to sue him. I'm hosed. I'm in trouble, right? Yeah. So we need to make sure that clients are doing the best thing for the house, which is the right thing for them, which is also consequently the right thing for you as the architect and the builder, right? Because we need to make sure that we're building houses that have built-in resiliency, that have built-in belt and suspenders when it comes to health and durability, longevity, durability, resilience. Those things need to be kind of baked into the process no matter what we build. Yeah.
I like that. The baked in, it's part of it. It's not an accessory,
it needs to be a standard.
Yeah. And that's certainly what you guys are preaching and doing, and that's why, part of why we're talking to you today.
Thanks,
regarding
appreciate it, y'all.
Regarding Los Angeles. Oh, and also we were just talking about before we hit record about fire resiliency techniques and strategies. Obviously, concrete you mentioned. But then you also said that you came across a product recently that
there's a brand new product to the marketplace that's actually going to take a huge splash at the International Builders Show here in about a month as we're recording this. I don't know when you publish this. But one of the hard parts for a builder, frankly, is to get to a 1 hour rated assembly. 5/8 drywall on the inside, type X, no big deal. We do that all day, every day. 5/8 on the outside, if it's gypsum board, is a huge pain. It is not fun. It's hard to put it in assembly. It's this bolt-on item that's hard to deal with from an architect's perspective, from a builder's perspective. Well, there's a brand new product that's basically nominal 1/2-inch plywood that has an intumescent coating on it, not a film, or not a film, not a paint, but a factory applied coating, kind of similar to, like, if you guys know Zip System sheathing, that's got a pre-applied WRB. This is a pre-applied intumescent coating that's basically like a film that's applied at the factory over a really high grade plywood that when you use it in assembly, gets you a 1 hour rated firewall by just having this plywood on the outside, regular insulation, or of course you can use a rock wool, mineral wool, higher fire resistant bat, and 5/8 on the inside. And now I've got a 1 hour rated wall. Wow. That is a really big deal. And the cool part about it is this product's actually, I saw the testing on it. It's actually in the, is it ASTM testing or is it NFPA testing? I can't remember, I'm sorry. But it actually went 90 minutes on the test when it only had to go an hour.
Wow.
And what happens is you're familiar with the term intumescent paint, right? They use it a lot in construction. A lot of times it's used over spray foam to present, to help spray foam not have flame spread or smoke spread. It's a paint that kind of blows up, and they figured out how to do it into a film on top of the plywood. And it the flames and as the heat gets to it, it continues to expand and chokes out the oxygen to the fire and protects that plywood from igniting. And again, it went like 90 minutes on the test. So your 1 hour rated assembly actually has some forgiveness too. And so you could actually, this part I need to do some more research on, but you could use this plywood and not even necessarily have to have a Class A rated siding on the outside to get a 1 hour rated assembly.
Yeah.
So in other words, you wouldn't necessarily have to use fiber cement, let's say. Fiber cement on the outside, 5/8 gypsum on the outside, mineral wool, and then 5/8, which is what we've had to do for a long time to get to that 1 hour assembly. Now you could use this plywood. It's called Firepoint is the brand name. And it's from this company called Arclin, Arclin. They're apparently a very old company who's been around forever. They're the company that makes the glue that goes in every piece of OSB or plywood in the nation. Okay. And they make the secret sauce that makes drywall homogeneous. So they're like Intel inside. They've been doing computers for 30 years, but no one thinks of buying, I'm going to go buy an Intel computer. I'm buying an Apple, but it has Intel inside. Yeah. So this company, Arclin, for whatever reason last year was like, we're actually going to make this ourselves and introducing this in the marketplace under our brand. So no one knows them, and they got a huge booth at IBS. And they contacted me after I made that video and was like, hey, do you know about this? We're going to be, we did a soft launch at I don't know, World of Concrete or something, and I hadn't heard about it. So
that's really,
I was
really
very,
amazing.
very impressed. It's a cool product. I suspect it'll be stocked all over California before long.
I think so. I mean, like we were saying also earlier that there's a big group of architects and other professionals in Los Angeles, including us, who have kind of come together and to try and figure out how we can be support and resourceful and to each other, because some of us have lost houses, and then also to the larger community. And it's just a lot of us being from here are already familiar with like the basic, building strategies of being fire resilient. But pooling our ideas and our knowledge together, and that's something that is a great product. It's interesting how many new products there are that come out constantly, and so one of the questions I had for you is, well, A, how do you keep up to date with all this stuff, and then B, I've always wondered, sort of as an architect and not as a builder, how many of these new, and I follow a bunch of Instagram channels that are featuring new construction products that I geek out on, even though I don't use them. I've always wondered how many of these products are actually useful for contractors and how many of them are cool, but not really,
not actually.
Yeah, kind of just gimmicky.
Yeah. That's a hard one. I mean, honestly, that's something that fascinates me too. I've always been a tech guy, and when I have these companies that I see at a show, I'm always I have the skeptical eye, right? I've been through enough lawsuits over the years. I was around for the EFIS failures in the early 2000s. I remember the 90s LP siding lawsuits. I saw mushrooms growing out of siding in the Pacific Northwest. I enjoyed the pain of dealing with the homeowners that thought their kids were going to die from mold on lawsuits that I was getting as a young builder in the 2002s. So I have a very skeptical eye, and I think that's honestly what drove me to start learning and digging into building science as a category. Like, if I'm going to not get sued, I need to build a house that is not going to have problems. And so whatever you want, homeowner or architect, I need to make sure that I'm not putting us in a position that has less forgiveness, that's more prone to problems, that's going to be an issue, right? And so the best way to do that is to put on the lens of building science whenever you look at a new product. Like, let's think about this. How is this going to fare over the next 30 years in this building I'm putting it in? Will this contribute to a drier, more airtight, more vapor open, whatever assembly? And then also for me, I've had to really think about too, what about my climate? Because I built in Austin, Texas, which is hot, humid. And frankly, compared to LA, we're a pretty rough place to be because we have such high humidity compared to y'all. So we get the same annual rainfall as Seattle. We get around 35 to 40 inches annually of rain.
Oh,
Really?
wow.
Which Seattle gets 38.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I'm in a climate that no one thinks of as being a rainy climate, but yet it's extremely rainy. Now we get it in 1 and 2 inch buckets at a time compared to Seattle that gets an eighth or a quarter inch every day all winter. But we also have this extreme humidity in the spring and the fall that we have to deal with. So we've got a weird climate. LA is a slightly more forgiving climate because you guys get about 20 inches of annual rainfall, right? You're a little bit more desert.
Yeah.
Which is partly why these fires are such a problem, is because it's generally a pretty dry climate.
Yeah.
You don't get 40 inches of rain that makes Seattle so green and beautiful in the summer. You get 20, which is half that amount of rain.
Yep.
But one of the beauties of LA is that it's also pretty mild in terms of temperature. It doesn't get much colder than 50, and it doesn't get much hotter than 90.
Oh, if
generally,
it hits 66 here, it's considered a cold day.
For sure. So that house that survived that was using passive house principles, on the forums that I was reading on Reddit and on the Instagram posts and the Twitter feed, everyone's like, "Oh, is it a passive house?" And the architect was like, "It doesn't need to be. I don't need exterior insulation, right? I mean, I use air conditioning very infrequently, and I use heating very infrequently. What I need is a house that has some resiliency against fire on the outside baked in. I need to think about Class A exteriors, using cementitious products, thinking about what's my roof membrane. And the big one is we've got to stop ventilating attics in your climate when there's fire risks.
Yeah.
And if we are going to ventilate, we've got to make sure that we've got an ember resistant vent going on. And that's it's much easier to do today than it was even 10 years ago. There's some products out there, but all those houses in the Palisades area were built in the 70s. They didn't have that unless they retrofit it. Yeah. And a lot of them had combustible exteriors, and they weren't using fire. They had wood fences up against the house that as soon as the fence catches on fire, the house is catching on fire. They had wood decks out the back door.
Wood
all
roofs
these things.
Too.
Wood roofs, right? Wood shingle roofs. And leaves piled up in the valleys of those roofs. So, I mean, it was a tinderbox. And then you combine that with 100-mile-an-hour winds, and those houses had no chance.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, you saw a really well-designed, relatively new house. That house is only like 6 or 8 months old when that fire happened, the one that survived that was the architect's project. And he was really smart about his design. And that house wasn't a crazy Tom Hanks budget $40 million house. Now, it wasn't cheap, I don't suspect. It looked like it was a $2 million house, let's say. But it was really smartly done, and really a very wise architect who said, let's put a metal roof on this. Let's not do overhangs. Let's do an unventilated roof. Let's do a combination of stucco. And I want to say there was a wood-looking fiber cement front on the house that I actually thought was wood when I made the video, but it was actually turns out it was a fiber cement that had been kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better term, faux painted to look like wood.
Right.
And then that concrete wall was a huge deal. I mean, the perimeter fencing that stops embers is a really, really big deal for people that have a fire next door. The wind is blowing, it blows right through that fence. If you can stop those embers from coming through your fence, whether it's by putting a metal fence that has a fireproof, or I should say an ember-proof screening on a metal fence, or going to the expense of a concrete fence, that's really going to be a big deal for you from not igniting your property. And then that house also had pretty close to a zero escape. There was, they had the 5-foot defensible zone all around the house, and then beyond that they did have some shrubs, but they mulched it with gravel, basically. And I also noticed there was one article from an LA reporter that I saw on YouTube that specifically mentioned that they had pulled their trash cans away from the house, and they had like some deck chairs out front that they had pulled away from the house as well. And it looked to me like the trash cans hadn't ignited, but you get a plastic trash can to burn right up against the house, and I guarantee you that's going to light up your wood siding. So the homeowner was smart enough to pull that stuff all back from the house. So there was both a great architecture, but also an educated homeowner and client that was smart enough to do some maintenance and some wise things when the fire started. So there was some amount of readiness happening there.
Yeah, and you listed, I think, probably half a dozen or so different strategies that are employed, and that's I think a larger good point that when it comes to the broader subject of how do you have a house that's fire resistant or resilient, it is a combination of all of these things, and the vented versus unvented roof is an interesting one in general because I feel like in terms of building science, it makes more sense to have just in general an unvented, a non-vented roof for fire reasons, but also just in general. And I think that used to be the way that you always had an attic, you had a vent, but then obviously embers just get sucked right up through the inside of the house. So talking about your story though, did you know that you were going to become a builder from a young age, or was that like, how did that happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. So growing up, I had a relatively handy dad, but my dad was it's good enough guy. He was not a craftsman, let's put it that way. He worked in the steel industry. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But I was always doing projects, and I kind of fell upon construction by my church that I was going to as a young junior high student in Pittsburgh. Had this really cool ministry that they sent our middle schoolers, our middle schoolers and high schoolers to this place that was in inner city Pittsburgh. And if you know the story of Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh had a lot of money in the 1800s from the steel industry. We have some beautiful brownstones in downtown Pittsburgh that look like your Chicago or New York brownstones, but those all got abandoned with this kind of 1920s and 30s flight to the suburbs. And so those homes have gone into disrepair. They're generally owned by people that are of a lower economic status. They don't have the money to fix up their beautiful old houses. So we, as suburban kids, were going into the inner city with this ministry, which was fantastic for me. I'll be honest, I grew up in a pretty upper middle class white suburb. I didn't know a lot of people in the 80s that weren't white. I had a few black friends. I had a lot of Jewish friends, but I certainly didn't know poor people or homeless people growing up in the 80s. So they sent us into these neighborhoods, and it was so good for me to interact with people from a different economic status that looked different from me, that I met people that didn't know how to read for the first time in my life. Wow. It was phenomenal for me as a young kid, and we were doing really basic work like, hey, let's fix what we would call a deck, which they would call a front porch or a stoop, on this brownstone that's crumbled, that's 150 years old. And now this 80-year-old black woman in inner city Pittsburgh who can't even read has these white kids from the suburbs working at her house doing something that's really beneficial for her. And man, it was so good for me. I absolutely loved it. And I saw how my hard work and sweat at the end of the day produced something that was really beneficial to these homeowners, to these residents. It was such a game changer for me in life. Like, wow, I can work hard and at the end of the day feel like, wow, I really accomplished something beneficial to this person, right, that changed their future of their life. Now they can get in their house without nearly breaking their hip, right? Yeah. And so I did that for about, 6, 7, 8 years through junior high, then high school, then I worked there a little bit in college. And I had this feeling about construction that was so good, but I was never a great carpenter or craftsman. I never was like, oh, I should become a plumber or I should go into the trades. At that time it was like, if you don't go to college, you're an idiot and you're going to be digging ditches. So I went to college, but I had all this construction background. And I basically got a manufacturing type degree. I went as an engineer and couldn't hack the math, so I failed out of differential equations, and that stopped my mechanical engineering degree. And so I went into industrial management and fell in love with the Toyota production system. And Toyota was the king of the 80s. They're like killing Chevrolet at the time. Like their cars were so much better, and Honda and all these Japanese companies. So I'm studying how they build better cars, and I graduate. And this is going to sound like really old man speak, but I'd never sent an email when I was in college until my last week of college. This is 1995. I sent an email on a server with like the prompt, and I never got a reply on it. So here I graduated college with never receiving an email. And I'm sending my paper resume out to Toyota, who's starting a new plant in, I forget where they were, somewhere in the South. And Nissan had a new plant in Tennessee, and I'm getting no response. I went to a small school outside of Pittsburgh that no one ever heard of. And so this construction company comes to recruit out of my college, and they're talking about this assistant superintendent job that they're hiring for. And I was like, oh, I don't want to be a builder. I don't know any builders. My dad was in steel, and I thought I was going to go into manufacturing. So I go to my buddy convinces me to go to their night before the interview information session. And I hear they'd brought one or two students back that had joined, a year or two prior. And they're talking about their job and how they're outside and how they're building houses. And they've got 15 houses under construction at once. This is a national production builder. And I was like, this sounds incredible. I had no idea there was a job as a builder, right? I just thought that there was jobs as carpenters or plumbers or whatever. So I go up to the company and was like, you gotta interview me tomorrow. I don't have a spot, but please, I would be perfect for this job. And I ended up working for that company for 7 years after school. Wow. And did a bunch of different jobs and absolutely loved it. And here I didn't realize at the time I was building really not very good houses, like houses today that I make fun of and make videos on. But then I mentioned at the top of the hour that the national mold crisis is what really drove me to realize, we need to pay attention to how we build houses, because if we just build them without thinking and we have leaks into a modern house with modern codes, those leaks turn into mold and rot and problems. Yeah. And, people that spent $250,000 for their dream home all of a sudden are living in a nightmare. And, they're looking at me as the builder like, you crushed my dreams. Like, you're the worst person ever. Yeah. And we're going to sue the pants off of you. And so, here I am, this like 30-year-old builder, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, I loved my job 6 months ago, and now all these people hate me and think I'm the worst person in the world because their kids are going to die of mold poisoning. And so it just made me go, all right, I just can't build the way we've always built. I need to figure out what it is that makes a well-built house, a healthy house, a house that's not going to have problems, that's not going to have mold. And the first thing I did, as you guys I'm sure know, the first priority is water, right? Like, how do we make sure the house doesn't leak?
Water,
a roof,
the enemy.
Yeah, a roof leak, you're going to get a call at midnight from your client. But an insidious window leak that they don't see for 6 months, you don't get a call until it's a call from a lawyer saying, hey, this house has problems and we're going to sue you. So that was my first priority, was going, all right, how do we make sure that these houses don't leak? And at the time I was building in Portland, Oregon, which is, 40 inches of annual rain. We were building houses very fast. We were building them without a lot of thought, just throwing them together. And that's a big reason why we had a lot of problems. And then once you start down that rabbit hole, you're like, okay, well, once I conquer water, what else do I need to conquer? Well, I need to really think about air now, because especially in a hot, humid climate, when air leaks in, it brings with it humidity, which can have condensation issues on the air conditioning in my Texas house. So I would say Texas houses have probably more mold than any other climate because of the air conditioning and condensation issues. And we put our ducts up in attics that are hot and humid, and then they leak air, and we put our air handler up there, which gets cold. And I could take you in any ventilated Texas attic today within 10 miles of my office and show you pretty decent mold colonies growing, because people have just been doing dumb things here for decades.
That brings up that reminds me of a couple questions I'd written down. Actually, the first was, or a topic. The first is that, from a client's perspective, when you're trying to find and hire a contractor and you have 3 that you're considering, if you don't know anything about constructing homes, which most clients don't, it's really hard to know good from bad because all you see as a client is some pretty pictures or a house tour of a house that looks nice on the outside. But and then the price, right? The price at the bottom line at the very end of the page. But to your point, there's so much more to it that goes inside of the walls that as an owner you might never see because you might not be, even if you go on site during that phase, you don't know what you're looking at. That is really, really critical for the long term and also the short term. And that's I think an aspect of building that I would advise clients to keep in mind. If someone's numbers are extremely low, it's for a reason. And if their projects on the outside look good still, then you got to wonder what's going on the inside.
Yeah, I mean, that's an industry-wide problem is that, everybody's website has gorgeous pictures, but what does it look like behind those pretty pictures? Yeah. And honestly, in LA, you guys have a pretty forgiving climate. I've been to LA several times. One of my Build Show sponsors, just to back up, I assume you guys know I started a YouTube channel and then I started the buildshow.com, and all our content's free, but we have sponsors that sponsor our content. And one of our bigger sponsors is this company called Builders First Source, which has LA, they have 10 yards in LA. So I've been to LA at their yards for events before, and I had to do a bunch of research before I did presentations at their yard because I was like, well, what are we dealing with in this LA climate? And I got a bunch of photos from job sites and was like, wow, they're replacing windows on 20, 30-year-old houses, builders around your area, and they're pulling the windows out, and even though the windows leaked, there's no problems inside the wall cavity because it's such a dry climate. Yeah. Right. And so that's actually that can be a benefit. I'm not saying we need to purposely build crappy houses, but I am saying that you're in a more forgiving climate than Austin, let's say, or than Seattle or Portland.
I was going to say, you just need that one time. I remember living in Central California during, my years in college, and I was renting this really cheap, crappy house. And one morning I wake up, put my foot on the carpet, and the carpet was soaked wet. And why? It's because there's no gutters on the roof because it's not mandatory. It only rains once in a blue moon, right? But that one night it rained a lot and the whole bedroom floor was soaked wet. And it smelled like, the old glue from the 50s. It was just disgusting.
That's a tear down.
I know, it's a tear down house for sure.
Yeah, that's right. Back to your point, though, how do you find a good builder? I really think that homeowners and architects and other people that are looking for good builders, they really need to visit job sites under construction because it's really hard to evaluate based on pretty pictures whether this builder is any good or not. But visiting under construction, that's where you can really see it. And as a side note, I have a podcast too. I made a whole episode on how to find a good builder. And if you just type in on Google how to find a builder and my name, Reisinger, that podcast is in your top search results. And I spent 30 minutes talking with one of my guys on how do I find a good builder is the title of it. It's episode 3. It's actually my 3rd podcast ever. I did that number 30.
Is it really? Yeah.
That was 3 or 4 years ago at this point. But it's a popular topic and it's a good topic. And we could go on that, but my general point is any builder can have pretty pictures. You really need to get to know them. And the other thing too is we need to be better at interviewing and digging into to doing our own research. And I fall on this too, right? I mean, I think it's interesting how over the years people have stopped calling reference checks. People have stopped asking for references. People are like, oh, the Google reviews were good. You're like, well, anybody can Google review. That's garbage, right? You go to Amazon, you're like, oh, what's the highest rated whatever product? We trust those reviews as if they're gospel perfect. And they're not, right? We really need to have a phone call and talk to somebody. So anybody that's thinking about builders, you want to get a reference from 3 people within the last 1 to 2 years that build a house with you, and let me call them. Give me their number. All right, because if you have 3 excellent experiences, then okay, we got somebody that really can satisfy their clients and has done a good job. And usually, we want relatively current references. You don't want somebody that you built a house for 10 years ago. There is some benefit to like, well, did you have any problems at year 5 and what did they do? Or, tell me about we also need to ask better questions. Like, tell me about a problem and how did the builder resolve it? Tell me about an issue with billing, or tell me about an issue with a sub or with a quality problem. How did they solve it? Oh, we never had any problems. Well, really? You never had any problems at all building a house? Well, what did you do? Just buy it like a car? We just showed up like, I'll take this one.
Yeah.
That's not how we build houses, right? That's not how it works. Of course you had a problem.
There were definitely problems. Problems.
I mean, we're building these houses on a dirt lot in the rain and the sun. There's got to be a problem somewhere. So we want to ask better questions.
Yeah. I think also, that points to just the sheer complexity of building custom houses that people maybe don't fully understand. And I don't expect them to, because it's not their profession. But, I can understand from the outside, it's like, well, houses get built all the time. What makes it so difficult? Why does it take a year and a half to build a house, or 2 years or 3 or whatever it is? And then you quickly go down the rabbit hole of, well, ... How much time do you have for me to talk about all the things that that make it complex and could go wrong? I also want to.
It's not for the faint of heart, David. I was just echoing what you said. It's not for the faint of heart. Like, you have to have some fortitude. Like, you can't be just the average Joe Schmo and build a custom home from an architect designing it to a custom building it. Like, you have to be a certain personality and have some fortitude. If you don't have that, just go buy a resale house, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and that's certainly that applies to those practicing and the clients too. It's a long process. One of the things we're always telling people at the outset, especially if they've never done it before, is one thing to keep in mind is this whole thing we're going to do. It's a marathon. It is not a sprint. So there's going to be bumps and bruises, and there's going to be problems, but think about the long term of just the process, let alone the house itself. And then that usually helps too, because it is challenging. But one of the things too with the contractor or building industry and professionals that I find interesting and maybe a challenge for the profession, I don't know, is that you can have it's very easy for builders to repeat the same thing they've been doing throughout their entire career. So I can find a builder who has built hundreds of houses and whatever types of projects they do, had a lot of repeat clients, had a lot of projects done, and they've been practicing for 40, 50 years. So I've been practicing for 40 years is always the thing we hear. But the question for me is, well, but have you been doing the same thing as what you did 40 years ago? Because I know, even as an architect, building construction standards and the way we do things has evolved tremendously over the last 15 years, let alone 40 years.
That's right.
So it's actually a problem if you have 40 years of experience doing the wrong thing.
That's exactly it.
That's
so exactly I don't know if I have a question with that, but I mean, and then it's interesting because you're like the opposite. You're at the forefront of trying to always improve. Is that? I mean, do you perceive that as being one of the bigger challenges with the profession?
For sure, that's definitely a challenge, and across the nation we have various levels of licensure, or in my case, no licenses needed in Texas. Do you guys by chance read Seth Godin's blog by any chance? Do you know who Seth Godin is, the famous author?
I know who he is, but I don't read his blog.
He's got a great blog that he emails you every day, and I don't read it every day, but his blog yesterday was really powerful to me. It was titled Honesty About Better. And I'll just read you 2 sentences. It says, "I don't want to learn to be better is something that we rarely admit." And then it goes on to say, I don't want to learn methods for creativity or marketing, even though they'll help me get unstuck. I don't want to learn how to use AI to transfer my work, even though it'll make me more productive. I don't want to learn basic selling skills even though it'll make a difference in my business. And it's funny, I think over the years I've ebbed and flowed on my desire to learn more. And funny enough, yesterday when I read that blog, I had 2 months worth of trade magazines on my desk, and I'm an old man, I still read magazines, but and I thought, oh my gosh, I haven't even finished, I haven't even touched last month's and the new issue's already come. Like, what does this say about me? Have I lost my passion for learning and my drive, that all of a sudden my trade magazines are like boop, 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 boop. Like normally over the years when I get those, I read them that night and like consume them because I want to learn, I want to get better. And so that blog post from Seth really made me think, gosh, am I taking the time to sharpen the saw and get better every day? Like, that's something that I don't want to lose. I think that's a skill that needs to be developed. And we need to realize, hey, I haven't been to the gym for a week. That's why I'm tired today. That's why I want to sleep in. That's why whatever. And just like if you don't train your muscles and your heart rate, you might have a heart attack someday. If we don't train our minds and get better at our jobs, we're going to do the same thing over and over, especially if it's the wrong thing. But we have to really be thoughtful about that. It takes effort. It takes thought. It takes planning. You know, I went to the gym at 6:45 today, and I had to talk to my wife the night before. Hey, can you take care of the kids in the morning? I'm going to go to the gym at 6:45. I had to set my alarm. I had to think about my clothes the night before. You know, it's effort to get a workout in, and it's just as much effort to learn at our jobs and do better. We can just show up and throw up, or we can purposefully learn a new skill and get better at our current skills. And frankly, the LA wildfires could be that catalyst for a lot of architects and builders around the nation to go, you know, my job as an architect or a builder is a really big deal. If I don't do my job to the best of my abilities, lives could be in the balance. And for me too, I always go back to, you know, those lawsuits from those people that either that I put EIFS on their house that was a terrible leaky facade that was fake stucco, or all those leaks we had that caused mold lawsuits in 2002. I mean, those people thought that I was the worst person in the world as their builder. So what do I need to do to make sure that I'm not going to get myself and my company in trouble? And not just short term, like not just the 1 year warranty, but like for a dozen years I'm on the hook 15, when it comes. Texas law for me is 10 years plus there's a 2 year discovery period. So basically any house I build from the time I get a CO up to 12 years later, I could be sued for that house for all kinds of stuff. Beyond 12 years, I have some more ability to shed that lawsuit, but not up to 12.
Right. I think it's the same thing in California, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be a little bit off on that.
And now a little break for our show sponsors. I used to start remodeling projects with hours of tedious measuring and recreating the existing conditions. And then I discovered Canvas, which is an iPad app and iPhone app that lets me easily scan entire homes in minutes and automatically generates editable models in format like SketchUp, ArchiCAD, Vectorworks, Revit, and more in as little as 1 day. Get to the design phase faster with Canvas. Visit canvas.io/SSP to schedule your demo and to get your first as-built free. Managing design projects and specifications can be challenging, but Programma makes it effortless. Trusted by top interior design firms in over 75 countries, it's the world's most elegant software for interior designers. With its suite of powerful tools, you will experience smoother client interactions with less back and forth, saving you hours of admin work and making your job more enjoyable. Stop struggling and start thriving with the seriously powerful Programma. Click the link in our show notes and get 25% off an annual subscription with code SECONDSTUDIO at checkout. You will wonder how you ever worked without it.
I think also, you know, the fires in LA, on the opposite side of it or the positive side of it, you know, your story about the blogger or the vlogger, I guess, who talked about losing his or potentially losing his house, and then the names that were engraved in a tile or whatever it was. It also, you know, the last few weeks has reminded me, or week or however long it's been, reminded me that what we do also as architects and builders has such a close emotional connection to people. And I think it's very easy for homeowners and even us as professionals to forget how meaningful these places are to all of us.
Yes.
All of us have some kind of home, a place that we call home. And then when you realize that it could be gone in a matter of hours, right? Like, what does that mean for somebody? And then, the weight and the value and the importance of having a place to call home is easy to forget. When you're in the day-to-day, during the work, trying to meet deadlines and whatever, it's easy to forget that very strong emotional side of it.
I think it's the meaning, but
Yeah.
it's also like how important and stable that home is to their day-to-day life, right? Like if they don't have that and they have a family and a job, how does life continue if the home is gone, right? How do you bounce back? How do you even restart or keep functioning where, kind of like your anchor point in your day-to-day life is not there anymore?
Oh man, that's a whole nother segment we didn't even get into. What is it, like 12,000 homes that burned in the LA fires? So you've got 12,000 families displaced that need a place to stay for a year or 2 or 5 till their houses are rebuilt. I mean, that's just such a stress on the system. And then how do you rebuild 12,000 homes? I mean, that's just that's such a years long task. That's so many houses.
It really is, and we'll see how everything unfolds. But this when it comes to remodeling or building a new house in normal conditions, where you already have the infrastructure and your neighborhood exists, that already is a long process, and it's much longer and much more costly, more expensive than most people think. And so you layer on top of the fact now the entire neighborhood is gone. For a lot of people, for those actually the few who will be able to afford to rebuild, it's going to be a bit of a shock, I think, when they realize that this is not a quick, thing. And the danger also is that people will want to move fast because they want to get back home or into the new house. Fine. But that's also where the tendency to go cheap and fast
taking shortcuts
comes in, right?
That's right.
And that's one of the things we've been talking about with our contractors and everyone else is how do we make sure that we are educating people? So even if they don't hire us, they hire someone else, fine, but just hire someone who's good, because you don't want to have, like you said, the mold problem or whatever other problem we would have in California, a little bit later on down the line if this is your forever house.
That's right.
So a lot of things to consider. The question I had, going back to the topic of building technologies evolving, is, I'm always watching your videos, and I'm always seeing that you're talking about this cool product and this way you're doing things that makes it more efficient or produces a higher quality house. And sometimes it seems to be that this is a relatively new product or way of doing things. What was my question? My question is like, how do you, so when it comes to getting hired for a project, right? The typical way of convincing a person that you should be hired is that you have a tried and true method of doing it, right? I've done this for many years. I know exactly how to do it. And we're going to kind of like repeat these tested processes on your house. So you have total security and assurance,
Right.
But at the same time, as builders and architects, we're always trying to advance and do things better. And therefore, when you try new things, there is inherently some level of risk, let's say. So the question I have for you as a contractor, and this applies to architects as well, is how do you have a conversation with a homeowner and say, we have this new thing that I want to try on your house. I, of course, have done my research. I think it's going to work. But I'm going to try it, and therefore it might cost a little bit more money because this is a new thing. When they could say, don't do that. Don't do that. Just keep it what you've been doing the last 5 years, and that's good enough for me.
Yeah. It's a good question, David. I mean, I think what it boils down to is I'm always looking to eliminate risk for me and the homeowner, and I'm always looking to build each house a little bit better. Back to my college education on the Japanese manufacturing, they call it Kaizen in Japan. It's that process of continuous improvement. Like every Japanese car in the 80s was a little better than last year's car. And I think we, especially COVID, I think kind of knocked us off that in some respects. Like we're like, oh my gosh, prices have gone up so much. We can't make everyone a little better because we got to figure out how to make it cheaper so the price is more affordable. And I'm with you on affordability of houses. You know, I don't want to be in this high horse like, oh, everyone can afford a $2 million house.
Right.
But at the same time, there needs to be a basic level of like, we're not going to build less than this. And code is not it, right? You can build a really, really poopy house and build it to code. Like a house that like a little bit of wind in the house is going to fall down. Like code really just addresses life, safety, health.
Yeah.
Like they really care more about the house burning down or burning down and burning your neighbor's house down than they do about your health in that house, right? As a side note, I have this super nerdy friend of mine, Christoph Irwin, who has a podcast called the Building Science Podcast. And I went to lunch with him the other day. And he's always been a big advocate of better indoor air quality in houses and how, you know, we don't utilize fresh air systems very well in American homes. We just rely on leakage for fresh air. And he says, you know, Matt, everyone's talking about the food you eat. Oh, you need grass-fed beef and you need this type of diet or that type of diet. You only eat about 3 pounds of food a day. But guess how much oxygen and air you breathe in your lungs? 30 pounds of air goes into your lungs all day long. And so why don't we care more about something that's a 10x factor in our bodies? And we don't. We're like, no, whatever. You know, if we need to put a dust mask on, sure. But that's about all we care about. Unless you're cutting, concrete, you don't think about it. We need to think about the indoor air quality of our homes because we're putting 30 pounds of this air in our lungs every day. And so there's an educational component that goes in with this. Like we need our architects and our builders to be continually learning about what's a healthier way to build, what's a more durable and resilient way to build. And we need to stop people talking about what's the price per square foot. You know, we don't buy cars by the pound. If we did, we'd all be driving a pickup truck like mine. I have a Chevy 2500 that by the pound is probably the cheapest car on the road because it weighs 7,500 pounds.
Right.
You know, we evaluate cars on the 0 to 60 performance. And as a side note, you know, Tesla, if you noticed all their ads for the first however many years they were in business, they never once talked about how eco-friendly they were or how much fossil fuels you were saving. They talked about how cool the car was, how fast it was 0 to 60, all the electronics, how it integrated with your this and that. They never got into the whole we're saving the world by driving a Tesla. And as a result, they blew up the company. And they're, you know, probably the world's biggest manufacturer of electric cars today. And I always thought that was so interesting that they first built a car that people wanted rather than a car that was particularly eco-friendly or met this or this standard, right? We're not going to sell Passive House by telling people that you're going to save the whales. We're going to build passive houses because people want a really comfortable, a really resilient, a really durable, and a really well-built house that has really healthy air for their children. That's why they're going to buy a passive house and a really well-built house. So we need to bring the rubber to the road where it really matters and talk about the things that matter for them. And part of that, too, is also figuring out what does matter for them. And sometimes it may not matter to them until you ask them.
Yeah.
You know, until we get into, hey, how healthy would you like the air in your house? Would you just like regular, office air, like your crappy office? Oh, you know, I never feel great in the office. Like I had to move offices because the air coming out of the vents was not great. Well, would you like that in your home? No, actually, now that you say that, I actually would like to think about the air quality in my house. You know, if we get into those things, people actually care about it. And I think that's what's fun about making videos all these years is I find people that get to my videos because they wanted to learn how to flush their tankless water heater, but they become subscribers and get into it because once they learn about it, well, they want to know more. And we have this phrase now that we say, know better, build better. Once you know better, you want to build better. So we need to get people to think about it, to talk about it, to get into the details. And once they do, suddenly they do care about it. They do want to know. Yeah. And for us, when it comes to rebuilding, we want to say, okay, would you like to build to these wildfire urban interface standards? Well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I would like to do that. Well, here's 13 things that we need to think about from this data sheet from the CAL FIRE website. Let's talk through those. What of these do we want to do in your house, or how important is this to you?
That's such a really, really good point, because like you started off by using the Tesla analogy, which is a great observation, and it's speaking to people in a way that they understand, first of all, and then asking the right questions, like you said, so now we have a conversation about the things that we know are important, but maybe on the face of it they wouldn't. And I think that reminds me that one of the challenges that the architecture profession has, and maybe it goes for construction and builders as well, is the communication to non-architects. Because architects care about a lot of different things regarding buildings, a lot of the construction aspects we've talked about, but also design and all these things. And for the average person who maybe also is interested in architecture, they might not care about all of these 4 different things as much as we do. And it's a mistake really as a profession or as a small business owner to just preach what you want to preach without understanding the perspective of the person you're speaking with, and talking about it in a way, again, that they understand and that they care about. And even if that means that you are, let's say, sort of packaging the content in a specific manner, but it's still the same content, like you were saying, passive house. Well, the house itself is going to be passive in the end, yes, and have all those principles, but the way we talk about it can have a great impact as to whether or not it even gets built that way. I think it's a really, really good point.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that too, David, I mean, builders and architects both need to be better at sales. And a big portion of being a good salesperson is being a good listener and really understanding what are people saying and what motivates and what drives them. And I think that in my industry, in the building side, we get caught up in this, what's it going to cost to build? And that's the only thing we hear, and we start competing on price, and it's a race to the bottom. And so we need to get rid of that race to the bottom and go right to, what's really important to you as a homeowner, and let's really listen. And then frankly, let's utilize some good sales skills. Like when I was a young builder, the national builder that I worked for moved me into sales for 2 years, selling new homes out of a model home. And I went to a 3-week class called Professional Selling Skills that was super valuable to me. And I still use a lot of those skills today. I think a lot of us could benefit from a professional selling class and really understanding where people are coming from, what motivates them, what's important to them, and let's get away from what's a cost. And frankly, what do you cost as an architect, or what do you cost as a builder? Because if I'm 2% less than my competition, that means nothing about my value to them as a builder. Or your value to them as an architect, because your fees are X dollars per hour less, or X whatever differently than the next person that they're talking to. It's about what's the value to you as the homeowner.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's really interesting you had a 3-week course in sales. I was just going to ask you, with the Build Show and its success, and you seem to be, from the outsiders as a viewer, like just a natural at all of this, right? I was also just curious, like in your life, there was that 3-week sales class, but so when you started the Build Show, did you know that you had an innate ability or learned a skill set and ability to speak so clearly and convincingly and interestingly to people, to fellow professionals, and also to non-builders like we're talking about? Because that's definitely part of the magic of the Build Show, is that
I appreciate that.
It's enticing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. No, I think all those are learned skills, and frankly, just like your podcast and my podcast, it takes enough inertia to push it uphill long enough that most people don't do it. Is it really that hard for you and I to sit down and talk for 90 minutes? No, but most people, they'll do it once or twice and they lose interest, or realize, only 10 people listened to it, or whatever, or only 50 people watched it, or 100 people watched it, and so they don't have the inertia to go back. It's like those January 14th New Year's resolutions that go by the wayside because they've been in the gym for 2 weeks and they didn't lose 10 pounds like they wanted to. They only lost 1 pound. You have to do this for a while. If you're gonna run a marathon, you don't train for 2 weeks and then go run a marathon. You have a multiple month training plan of a lot of hard work to get there. And for me, the build show, just as a quick story, that's my story that I'll tell people. I started on YouTube in 2008, and prior to that, I've been blogging for about a year. And really, I only did YouTube to have a video to put on my blog. I didn't think YouTube was going to do anything. I just did it so I can embed this YouTube video on my blog post. And I'd been blogging for 6 months and had done, I don't know, let's say 24 blog posts in 6 months.
Wow.
And it felt like I was putting these blog posts in the trash. Like, no one's reading this. Right. This is stupid. Why am I doing this? Just because this marketing guy told me I should do it. So then I went to a prospect meeting like 6 months after doing it. And they're like, "Oh, Matt, hey, it's so great to meet you." And I was a young builder. I was actually new to Austin at the time. I didn't grow up here. This is my wife's town. And I was starting my new company. And I was like, "Well, how do you know me? Like, do you know my wife's family, or like, what's the connect? Why are you acting nice to me, basically?" And they're like, "Oh, I read your blog posts. I Googled your name and your blog post came up, and I read a couple of them. Oh, you seem like you kind of know what you're talking about." And I realized, by writing that blog, it gave me some credibility with these people that eliminated at least 15 minutes of what kind of shady builder are you? And I bet your podcast does that too. When people Google your names, your podcast comes up, and whether they listen to a whole episode or not doesn't matter. They listen and go, "Oh, this David and Marina, they're pretty smart. Like, they're interviewing smart people. They have a smart podcast." It gives you a credibility versus the other architect they're interviewing down the street that, doesn't do anything. Maybe all they have is pretty pictures on their Instagram. Maybe they have pretty pictures on their Facebook, but they're not putting themselves out there, and they're also not putting their personality out there. And that's the thing about YouTube that really made me realize, I need to keep doing this, because I did the same thing for YouTube for a while. I was on YouTube for a year or two and never got more than 50 or 100 views per video. If it got 100 views, I'd tell my wife, "You won't believe it. That video I posted last month, it hit 100 people watched it. It has 100 views. That's crazy." But again, I would go to interviews after being on YouTube for a year, and I'd have, 14 videos on YouTube, and people acted like I was their long lost cousin because they knew me. They had some idea of my personality before I came to the interview. They knew that I seemed smart. And so now, instead of eliminating 10 or 15 minutes of what kind of shady builder are you, I got rid of 30 minutes of that. And not only that, but I started competing against people who had been in business 10 years longer than me, who had no presence online except for a pretty website. Because they got to know me and they realized, this guy's a smart builder. Like, he's talking about things that I never thought of, like, should I use this insulation or that insulation, or what's the difference between double glazed and triple glazed windows, and what does solar heat gain coefficient mean to me, and what should I look for on that U value on the windows. It was nerdy stuff, and I tend to connect with the nerdy person in the family. If the husband was an engineer, I'd connect with him, or if the wife was a researcher, she would latch on to my videos or whatever. As I'm talking about clients here. And I just kept at it because I thought it was good for my business. I didn't think that we were going to have a whole nother business, or I wasn't trying to build 1 million subscribers on YouTube. I was simply just trying to promote my business. And that was a free way to do it for me, was posting these videos that I'd done with my flip video camera, which you can see in the,
I was wondering if those were, I couldn't quite tell. I thought those were video cameras.
That's my old flip video camera that you guys probably are not old enough to remember, but that's before cell phones took videos. There was no smartphones back then. I just had a flip phone or flip video camera, and then I upgraded to a Craigslist camcorder right there in the background.
Nice.
That was $300 on Craigslist. I was like, "Oh my gosh,
oh, that's a big purchase."
This?
Yeah.
Can I do this? I think I should. It'll take better videos. And then I got a brand new $900 camcorder a year or two later. It was like, whoa, I'm big time now. I own a camcorder that's like a new one. And then I bought a wireless mic, and so it's turned into a whole different deal that I didn't expect, but it's still awesome for my business. I mean, most of our clients these days, come to us first, and then we take them to a local architect that we think's a good fit for their project.
Yeah.
I still don't do any architecture in-house. We do about 7 homes a year, customs. We also do some remodels. I really like still keeping my hand in remodels. That we learn a lot on remodel projects.
Yeah.
And then the build show's blown up. We have a website now that has 14 other contributors besides me. So we publish about 16 videos a week on thebuildshow.com.
Yeah.
That's a lot of content.
It's all incredible. And I was actually very curious to know about Rising or Build and how many projects you do. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you don't do, architecture in-house. And one of the other questions I had was, had you ever considered that, but rolling over or not rolling over, but transitioning and becoming a design build company?
Yeah, that's in the future plans. We actually have hired a registered architect. A woman named Chelsea is on my staff, who's our first true architect hire. And she's mainly doing pre-construction work with us and filling in supplemental drawings for existing architects, I should say. But we are hoping to actually have a client that would be a design build client, and Chelsea would do the architecture. And that's something I'm debating. Kind of ramping up a design build company. I really love working for outside architects. We've had a lot of success in that over the years, and it's allowed us to do a real breadth of projects, from crazy ultra modern projects with a bunch of semi-celebrity architects you might recognize from Austin, like the Michael Shoes of the world, or Alter Studios, or some of those big firms in Austin. But interestingly enough, we don't get a look at some of the even bigger, what I would consider some of the bigger Austin jobs, because of our social media presence. I'm pretty sure my buddy is building Elon Musk's house in town, and number one, I wouldn't want to do that. But number two, we don't get a look at those projects in the like 5 to 10 million and up range. I think because they want to make sure that their house wouldn't be featured on a video or an Instagram post.
Yeah.
And frankly, our contract says, hey, your house is going to be featured in a video and an Instagram post.
Gotcha.
So don't even think about some type of, your name is not going to be featured. The address is, we're never going to spotlight you, but I may show off your kitchen, or I may show off your HVAC system, or I may talk about your insulation or your foundation or whatever. Yeah. And so there's a certain class of folks that are like, I would never build with them, which is fine.
That's increasing. I think obviously someone like Elon Musk he's a one of one, but a lot of folks who have a lot of money who are not, a celebrity person, are increasingly feeling that way. And I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing or what, but the concern or fear of security, being known, having, safer, all this kind of stuff is wrapped up into kind of the same part of conversation. We have so many architects we know, they have their entire recent portfolio. No one will ever see it.
It's just NDAs, and you can't publish anything.
And no photographs sometimes too, and it makes it difficult. Honestly, it makes it difficult as an architect to want to take on a project where there's going to be zero documentation of the fact that it was ever done outside of us knowing it, and that's just it's a hard thing, and difficult with houses anyway.
Yeah, that's a difficult ask, and I'm thankful that we've had that in our contract for a couple of years now, so we don't have to get into that. And if we did, we'd be like, well, look, we're going to really be cautious about you and your address and your person. Sure. But I'm going to show off your kitchen that I'm really proud of, or or for me, your attic, or your mechanical room, or your HVAC system, or your filtration or fresh air or whatever. And we tend to get clients these days that are nerds and love it, and are actually a bunch of my clients these days are disappointed I'm not making more videos of their house. I had a client last week tell me that at a meeting, like, why haven't you made a video of my house in a couple months? Like, I think our kitchen's phenomenal, don't you? And I'm like, well, yeah, but like, there's only so much I can talk about in your kitchen. Like, I'm sorry. I'm like, well, I promise I'll put it on Instagram soon, right?
I'm busy building your house, okay?
Yeah, and I'm not actually. I mean, that's the thing that we try to tell clients. I only spend 10% of my time in the building company, 90% of my time in the video company.
Oh,
So,
wow.
Okay.
you know, my name's on the door, but my partner Tim is really the managing partner of Reisinger Build. And I have a fabulous team, and you know, I think one of our secret sauces is that we use the same subs over and over and over again. So almost every sub in the field are subs that remember me on the job site every day, all day, and it's the same people. And that's our secret sauce: is the same subs doing consistent work, different architects, different projects, different whatever, but the same workmen and women that have the same great work ethic, that have consistent pricing, that have a great high level of integrity on the job. We do cost plus jobs too, right? So I make sure those guys don't ever get hosed because they underbid the project and screwed up. You know, I'm always making sure that the subs are paid, not overpaid, but paid.
Yeah.
You know, there's never this, oh, gotcha. You know, you said it was 80,000 to frame this. You got a hold of that.
Yeah.
You know, we actually have a cost plus framing contract.
Interesting.
Where my framer renegotiates his pricing every year, but I have a week rate and a day rate from him for his crew. And that's the reason why I've used him for 12 years, because he's fair with me and I'm fair with him.
Yeah.
And he does a fabulous job. His guys are never on Facebook when I drive up to the job site on their phones. They're working hard all day. And as a result, if it takes you 14 weeks, I'm going to pay you 14 weeks. If it takes you 6 weeks, I'm going to pay you 6 weeks. And he's in demand, so he's not milking jobs for me either. But he knows, hey, if I continue to do good work for this builder, I'm going to continue to get good work. And that's the kind of subs we use. And as a result, you know, we've continued to be busy.
That's great. I think that's super important for everyone in our industries to have that. I guess you'd call it a network that is trusted and you know them well. Yes. Because there are unfortunately so many tradespeople who are not great at their jobs, and I find like for us it's kind of a game of sometimes trial and error if you're working with a new person and you're just trying to sift through all of the people to find the good ones. And once you find a good one, you hold on to them and they hold on to you because you both kind of recognize like, okay, we have something good here. And it's not easy sometimes to find that right pairing.
That's right. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that the Build Show has evolved to be so huge and so much of your time goes toward it. How do you see the Build Show evolving over the course of the next, I don't know, X amount of years?
Yeah. 10 years, I don't know. It's hard to say what the 10-year looks like, but I've been at this since 2008, so this isn't a overnight success, right? We didn't get to where we are by doing this in 2 years. I mean, we're how many years in? 16, 17 years in at this point. The next big thing for us that I'm working on behind the scenes is a standard for construction that I'm trying to unveil this fall. We're going to call it the Build HD standard. And it will be, here's how to build a house the Build Show way. And we'll have some tiers. And I'm not trying to compete with Passive House. This isn't a code book. I want a really well-built house for my family. And I want a house that's going to be resilient and durable, that's going to be built to withstand whatever is going to be thrown at it in the next 100 years in my area. And it's going to be built smart, but this isn't a standard for finishes. This is a standard for all the things you can't see after the house is complete. Right? And so code doesn't really address that. And honestly, I don't think Passive House does either. So we're gonna have our own standard that we're currently actively on development in, that will be the Build HD standard. How we're gonna go to market with it, I don't know. I mean, everything we've done to date is all free, so this will be a free standard. And will be available for everyone to use. And I don't think I'm going to get into certifying like Passive House as a whole certification. I think this is going to be hey, if you want to use this, great. But here's how to build a really well-built house. And if you're a homeowner, here's the things I would recommend you do to make sure that if you are building this standard, that it's built to that. At this stage of construction, you want to have this done. You want this blower door score at the end from an independent person. You want these types of things. The hard part for me that I'm still wrapping my brain around a little bit is how do I make one standard fit in all the different climate zones?
I was just going to
how
ask.
much do we vary, right? Because
Yeah.
just like we talked about earlier, LA is a pretty mild climate. So if you're building in California, it might be, hey, we need to really make sure that we're making really good strides on a house that's going to withstand an earthquake and maybe a fire. But we don't need a house that has the same insulation levels as a house built in Minnesota. It's just not important.
Yeah. That makes that's really, really interesting. The certification, I mean, I could see where it would have value, but I also feel like you have built such a reputation with the companies that if it has your stamp on it, that is in itself probably in a lot of people's eyes as good as that certification.
I think also it makes it more accessible to people. Sometimes certification just scares people away because it's
right.
like, oh, it's too much paperwork, it's too much things I have
sure
to
it
report
is.
and get
I
approved.
agree. Yeah.
Versus like, let's just get educated and do the things right, and
That's right.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. And maybe the way to commercialize it, which is what we've always done, is we charge manufacturers to let them pay, and then it's free for architects and builders. That we always want the education to be free, but maybe there's some version of this product meets the Build HD standards, and if you want to get us to certify it, we will, and then you can use our logo for $10,000 a year, Mr. Manufacturer, or whatever. I don't know. We got to figure that part out.
Yeah.
But the point is, I feel like we've got a lot of standards, but not all of them really give me what I'm looking for, which is that really healthy, really resilient, really durable, really well-built, solid house that's beyond code when it comes to safety and health, is different than passive house. It's not just about energy use. It's more than that. There's a craftsmanship component too. There's a remodelability component that I'm trying to figure out how would that work. Like I really want my windows to be able to be replaced without destroying the house.
Yeah.
And windows have a service life. Maybe some windows have a 20-year service life and others have a 50 or 75 or maybe even 100-year service life. But if we want a house to last for 300 years, we got to replace the windows. So let's figure out how to do that without ripping the brick off. Let's think about how replaceable these things are. And even at some point, I really want to get into being able, I think that Europeans are better at this. How do we service all our utilities and replace them? If you go into a house built in Norway, like I was earlier this year, you'll notice that all of their plumbing comes pre-sleeved and all their wiring comes pre-sleeved. And they do that because if you want to pull a PEX line out, all you got to do is go to the mechanical room and start pulling and cut it off underneath the kitchen sink. And you could pull that PEX line out and refish a new PEX line through that sleeve.
Oh, cool.
And it comes from the manufacturer like that. So they're like, oh, this house is going to last long enough to need to replace the plumbing. How do we do that?
Yeah. It's also fascinating the building standards across different places. You go to other countries and they do things sometimes that just objectively makes no sense at all, but other times it makes like complete sense. And yet you come back to the United States and we don't do that because of, the cost, or probably because just the way things have evolved. It's evolved a certain way, and now it's just a standard. We don't do that, but we should.
Short-term thinking.
It's short-term thing. We were at, the window manufacturer Skyframe. We were visiting. Yeah. Well, anyway, they're a Swiss company. They do like very large panes of glass, frameless windows. That's their jam. But we were out at their headquarters in Switzerland this last summer.
Cool.
And they have a certain detail at the sill for getting water out and keeping water out and allowing water to get out that they employ everywhere in the world except for the United States, where they have a different detail for the United States because we do it a certain way. And they were very kind and gracious because all of us were from the U.S. that were visiting. And like, we're not trying to say that you're wrong, but why do you do it this way? And none of us really had an answer, because when we saw the European version, we're like, that actually makes kind of more sense what you're doing. Totally. I don't know why we do it, this way over here. But anyway, I know we're actually just past the hour. So one of the last questions that I had that we always like to ask more for fun than anything else is, what is your favorite building And it doesn't have to be one that you've built, although it could be, but just in general, what is your favorite building?
Oh, man.
It's the hardest question.
This is going to sound really egotistical, but my personal house. So I've been building as a professional builder for this is my 30th year in construction. I started professionally in 95, and I built a house for my family and moved in 3 years ago now. So I went 27 years of thinking about it, longing for, it is a bit of the American dream to build your own house someday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'd remodeled a couple of my own houses to small degrees. One house when I lived in Portland, I replaced the kitchen out and added a bath where there wasn't one before as a 30-year-old newly married, remodel. And then my other house that I remodeled here in Texas, I did a pretty extensive remodel, but it really, for cost reasons, I didn't do some things that I would have liked to have done, especially when it came to the health of the house. And it turns out my daughter had pretty good asthma. And so moving into this new house, and also the position that I was at in life where I had more money and I had the build show, and I could also go to manufacturers and say, hey, give me a break on this material. But I built just a fabulous house for my family. It's not particularly large. It's 2,700 square feet. There's 6 of us that live there, plus a dog. But it's just so well thought out. I used a local architect, this guy, Kit Johnson, and I had my buddy Steve Basic, who shoots videos, who's an architect out of Boston, help me as well. And there's just something about the house that, I thought about it for so long. I built most of it during COVID, so I was able to be the site superintendent, where I officed out of the front porch on Zoom calls while work was going on, and then I could direct things and talk about it. And I made a bunch of YouTube videos about it. There's just something about that house that even if I move someday, I kind of do want to build another house now. But even if I do move someday, that will always be the first house I ever built for myself.
Yeah.
And will always hold a special place in my heart. There's just something about it that, I can see why people love the American dream of designing and building your own house. It's there's something about it that's so magical and so different to move into a brand new house that had so much time and effort and thought put into it. And is it perfect? No, there's a bunch of things I do differently, but still it's so different than other houses I've lived in the past. I absolutely love it. It's a phenomenal house.
That's awesome. I love that answer. That's great. That's the first time someone's given us that answer, but I love it.
Oh, I'm surprised. All right. I figured with your audience, you would have that a lot.
Now, we get a lot of, famous buildings, some esoteric buildings, but not a lot of own their own houses. But I like that.
Yeah. That's funny.
Matt, we went through an hour and a half like a breeze. So, I had a feeling that was going to be the case. And I had a feeling that if we all had infinite time at our disposal, we could keep chatting for the next probably 6, 10, 20 hours. But we'll leave it here for now.
So fun. Thank you, guys. Fun that I didn't know you very well. Now I feel like we're old friends.
That's perfect. Thanks so much for making the time on a Friday morning.
For sure, guys. Wish you the best. Get out there and build some great houses in LA. And if we can figure out a way to get the build show out there and help with that, we will.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's episode. We appreciate your support and listening. And if you want to support us further, then you can leave a review of the podcast in the Apple Podcasts app. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube. The website is Second Studio Pod. The office is framearchitects.com. Any questions, guest suggestions, comments, help that you need regarding rebuilding in LA with the fires, feel free to reach out to us. The podcast has a hotline, which is 213-222-6950. So you can call and leave a voicemail there or leave a text message and we'll get back to you.
We're also on social media, Facebook and Instagram, really mostly. The handle is Second Studio Pod. And that's it. We have the website and secondstudiopod.com, and that's all.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks everyone for listening. Talk soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.